Welcome to the Grow Podcast. I'm Pastor Mike with New Hope Network. We're here to help you take your next step in your relationship with Jesus. I'm so glad you're with us today.
Well, what's up, New Hope family? Welcome to episode 2 of the Grow Podcast. My name is David, and I'm here with Pastor Mike.
You got it right this time.
Thank you. Welcome to episode 2.
Episode 2
podcast.
That comes. You're right. That comes after
Comes
episode
after
1. I was never good with math.
No. Well, thankfully, it's not a math podcast. So
fortunately, yeah.
But it is a podcast about us growing in our relationship with Jesus and figuring out, hey, what might my next step be in my relationship? And I'm really excited for this one because
I know you've been talking about this one for a while.
Yeah. So not all the time on the Grow Podcast are we going to go specifically off of the message from the weekend, but a lot of the time we are, and we are today. And the message this weekend was about partying.
Let me be specific. The message for New Hope here for online was
yes,
because our in-person
right.
campus,
we had a different experience
So
everywhere.
If you're on Williston or Tioga, you're going, what message?
Yeah, and if you attended in Williston or Tioga, maybe go check out the message from the New Hope here online. It was like 15 minutes this week, so it was a lot quicker.
You sound so surprised by that.
But it was no comment. But it was about partying, which was fantastic. And so I'm pretty excited to talk about partying here for the next 20 minutes.
I'm glad you're excited about
Pastor Mike. First question. Why is religion so boring if we're supposed to party?
Because, I mean, it's a valid question because so many people have that view,
right,
don't they, of Christianity. Well, Christians are boring. Christians are no fun. And we haven't done ourselves a whole lot of favor.
Right.
You go back to even the early days of the Puritans and the Quakers who came here. It's like, we're cutting out all holidays, no laughter, no fun.
Not classic partiers, the Quakers.
Yeah, they weren't. Which is real interesting because when you go back, say, to the early church, like the Book of Acts early church, they were known as people who had a lot of fun. They had probably, I don't know if we want to say crazy parties, but there are some scholars who really have suggested they had some crazy parties because they were described by the people around them. In Acts chapter 2, they're described this way on the day of Pentecost. It's like they're full of new wine, which the term new wine in that day and age meant the stuff that's extra powerful.
The good stuff?
Yeah. And so everybody's saying they're acting like they've got no inhibitions. And of course, we know they actually hadn't been drinking. They just were full of joy. And Jesus was accused of this, though, wasn't he? When you think about this, in Luke chapter 2, it says, he talked about this. He said, you keep saying that the Son of Man, talking about himself, has come eating and drinking. And you say, he's a gluttonous man, and you're putting me down for it, and yet that's what you want. So Jesus was obviously a guy who enjoyed hanging out with people.
Yeah, he certainly chose like the type of people he put close around himself.
And he was known for this.
Yeah, the fun.
Where was his first miracle? Think about that.
At a wedding.
At a wedding. And the
party.
Jewish wedding was not a one-day reception. This was a multi-day. I mean, they knew how to celebrate. It's kind of cool. In fact, if you go back in Jewish history and into the Old Testament, and I did a little bit of research on this, they had, and it depends on how you count them, 7 to 9 different holiday seasons. And some of their holidays were like 8, 9 days long. So, and those were prescribed by God. You're looking at my notes because I'm jumping ahead on that one.
No, I'm writing my own here.
So God himself came up with the idea of partying. And if you go on down through church history, I mean, I don't exactly know where we went south on this. Because like Augustine, if you may not be familiar with Augustine in church history, he was in the late 300s, early 400s AD, a priest, a teacher, but people came from miles around to hear him speak. And this is the cool thing. When he spoke sitting down. Everybody had to stand up. And
you should try that on a Sunday.
We'll see how that works. And he would speak for long periods of time. And people loved it. And was he challenging? Yeah. Was he in your face? I mean, you read his stuff. But he was incredibly sarcastic and humorous. And Martin Luther, by the way, was the same. Martin Luther, and this is one of my favorite quotes, so I've got to read this. Martin Luther was accused of saying, "You're just too frivolous and you party too much." And he said, "What other cause do you think that I have for talking so freely and making merry so often, except that I wish to mock and harass the devil who's wanting to mock and harass me?" He's like, I'm going to party, you know? So there's really, when you go and work in church history, there's really no specific kind of line that I've found in any kind of history when Christians kind of said, we need to stop having fun. You can find pockets of it. You know, during times of persecution, obviously, things became very serious. And I wonder sometimes if people just got used to being serious. And, you know, you see this some in our own world right now where, like in the days of the Soviet Union, behind the Iron Curtain, where the church was so persecuted and they came out of that persecution, and they certainly had joy, but it was tempered.
Sure.
You know, it was where they got into it. I think, and you can see this in church history, pagan worship, and even some people in the name of Christianity just took things to excess. And the Bible's pretty clear on excess.
Right.
And so I think a lot of what's happened is reaction.
So was it almost a legalistic reaction to
I think so.
to the excess? Whereas, okay, well, if X amount is too much, then any of it is too much.
Yeah, I think part of it is religion. Not that Christianity isn't a religion, but religion in the wrong sense. Religion in the wrong sense is about control. And when religious people, and I wrote this down because I wanted to get this right, when religious people get a hold of something like the Bible, they twist it to control people or to try and control themselves. The Bible certainly gives boundaries to live by, but those rules are those rules meant to manipulate or control us? No, they're meant to say, here's the guardrails. One of the greatest stories I heard about this was an artist who's a follower of Jesus. She was speaking at an event in Kansas City years ago, and she looked like you would kind of expect an artist, you know, to look like. She had the dreadlocks, she had the tattoos, she was described, the guy who was describing her said her skirt kind of looked like some kind of Cracker Barrel tablecloth. You know, that's not my description. That was her. She was full kind of hipster. And after her lecture, she took some questions from the students, and one of them asked her, this I think is a great transition to how to help us on this, asked her how she decides when to begin painting as an artist. Here's what she said. She said, the first step in the creative process is knowing your boundaries. I love to paint the whole city, but I can't. So before I paint a canvas, I need to know its dimensions. And when you think about that, it should kind of put a light off in our head. Because we think partying in the terms of freedom, no boundaries. And God says the best freedom, like with anything, the best way to live life is life within boundaries. It's like the best way to speed down the highway is with no edges to the road. Well, somebody's going to die. You know, the best way to enjoy that is to know, okay, here's the edges of the road. And so that's where I think we've gotten wrong, is we put too tight of boundaries or made the wrong kind of boundaries.
So you talked in your message a little bit about they threw a party and Ezra read the law.
Back to Nehemiah. Yeah.
For 6 hours?
My favorite verse in the whole Bible. It says from morning until afternoon, I think is how it's said in Ezra 8. It's about 6 hours. Like, if you ever want to know how long a sermon is, Bible might give you a hint. Just saying.
So no offense to those who might want to teach for 6 straight hours. Is God's idea for a party then as boring as just sitting and listening to the law be read for 6 straight hours? Okay.
Yeah.
Then what is it? What is?
Well, and I think it goes back to what we talked about on Sunday is don't get caught in that just sounds incredibly boring. Look for what was happening. And so much of the Bible is this way. We get caught in, why did they say this? Stop and take a look at what was really happening. What was really happening, and all those holidays we talked about there in the Old Testament. By the way, the word holiday appears in the Bible in the book of Esther. It's a day set aside to remember what God has done. And I think that's what was happening, is they were just stopping and they're going, oh, this is who God is. Oh, look at what God has done. And it sets the boundaries for the right. Not that it's, we seem to think spiritual has to be serious. So much of what we call spiritual actually isn't spiritual. So much of who God is, when you look at him, he's pretty hilarious. I mean, who invented the platypus, for Pete's sake?
Hey, that's my home country you're talking about.
Yeah, I know. So. And I'm going to make fun of it.
But you're not wrong.
Yeah. I mean, who came up with some of these things? And so why can't stopping and remembering who God is just be part of hilarity and joy? And look at what God did. He helped us build the wall in 52 days. Look at what God did. He helped me through that hard week at work. And so when we stop and begin with, this is who God is, I think it begins to point us in an incredible direction.
And the Old Testament had numerous examples of it's usually centered around food, which works well for me, but feasts and things that were specific
every feast
to this. Yes, we're gonna feast and we're celebrating, but the focus is there was a purpose for it.
There were sometimes, what's so interesting, you see the contrast, because there were sometimes it was fasting. And it was, I'm going to give up something. Now, those weren't necessarily times of
I don't like those as much.
Celebration. Those were times of, I need to get something out of the way that's getting in the way. But then there's other times where God said, enjoy world. What did he tell Adam and Eve? He said, I want you to rule over the world. But he said, I want you to enjoy the world that I've given you. With Nehemiah, he was representing God. And I loved in Nehemiah, he said, go and eat choice food and drink sweet drinks. If you're from the South, it probably means sweet tea. I'm not a big sweet tea.
My wife loves sweet tea.
Okay, see, I'm not. But
we lived in the South for a couple
it might
years,
be a good root beer.
I'm with you.
Good.
Now I want a root beer.
Good Mountain Dew.
Producer,
something like that.
Could you run and
vanilla chai. That's my go-to. I know that's kind of a frou-frou drink. But just celebrate who Jesus is. Yeah. Colossians says, whatever you do in word or deed, do it all in the name of Jesus. That kind of starts where do it and do it all in and enjoy stuff. Do fun stuff. But here's the boundary.
Well, so
go ahead.
I think last week on the first episode of the podcast, we talked about the difference between relief and restoration.
Yeah.
And I think for a lot of people, partying or really
is relief.
It's a relief. And sometimes it could be in a healthy way. We talked about relational proximity and needing to have those people around us. So if it's that boundary God, type of party we're talking about, that could be a positive thing. But how do we keep from using it as a relief? I just need to be a distraction.
Yeah, man, we could go a million different directions on that because one of my thoughts as you were talking about that is even how we approach vacation, because most of us approach vacation in terms of relief, and vacation is kind of a mini party a lot of times, isn't it? In terms of relief.
I don't know. It's been a while since you vacationed with a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old, so
yeah, your whole goal is relief. Let's get rid of the pressure, right? But a lot of times it's like I need to do something to get rid of the pressure, instead of something to refill my heart. And when to get rid of the pressure, it's more about escapism. And escapism is medication, escaping, distraction instead of engagement. And a lot of times in order to do that, it goes to excess. And actually, we do things that can cause more damage in the long run. That's why God says, if you're going to do this, have some boundaries to it. And First Corinthians 8, it says, be careful, however, that the exercise of your freedom does not become a stumbling block to others and to yourself. So what are the boundaries of this? And I think the boundaries of that is excess. Is this just escape? Or is this something that truly adds value? And it's so hard to explain. I've wrestled with how to explain this. Maybe you can help me with this, David. Maybe not. But you really don't know this until you experience it. I can go out and I can party and I can get caught in or I can binge my favorite TV show for 12 hours, and there's nothing wrong with that. But did that really refill me, or did it just cause me to? We call it unplugging, right? So unplug by definition is doing what? It's removing me from any energy input. And that's not refilling. That's just stopping the drain. And so I think the key to partying is, how do I do this in a way that I stay plugged in, but in a way that doesn't drain me?
So that how am I keeping my focus on joy then, if maybe I do have a tendency to use a partying or any sort of distraction from my problem? How do I keep my focus then on the joy that God brings? And
well, it goes back to let's start with we start with saying, let's be reminded of where joy comes from and why we can have joy. I can have joy because ultimately God's got everything in his hand. I can have, and how do I remember that? By rehearsing what he's done. That's why Thanksgiving is one of my favorite holidays.
It's my favorite.
It's not Christmas, but it's one of my favorite holidays. But why is Thanksgiving so meaningful? I mean, yes, we say food, turkey and mashed potatoes. But if you just spend it all on turkey and mashed potatoes, you're 10 pounds heavier the next week. And are you really refreshed? You may have unplugged for a few days. But you know what? If you really make Thanksgiving about what it's supposed to be about, not just turkey and mashed potatoes, but really stopping and being thankful. What is being thankful? It's rehearsing. Oh, this has really been good. God's good. I'm staying plugged in, and I'm not keeping the energy drained.
Which is why you talked in your message about the tell the God stories at your party, which does, I mean, that's not, the first thing you might think of like when, hey, I'm gonna have a party, even just like hey, I'm gonna have some people over for a party, not like a rager, but finding a way to tell the God stories, putting him at the focus of that, then can help with that, like you're saying.
And we get so serious about this. Oh, I need to tell God. I mean, it's just fun. My kid did a crazy thing last week. Didn't God make a goofy kid?
Yeah, I know your kids.
They are. And why not celebrate that kind of thing, and then include someone else who needs joy? Because we have become, by sin, incredibly self-centered people. And we all say this, right? We all say it's better to give than receive, but we don't practice it. But when you do it, you go, oh, something just happened in me that happens no other way. That's called refilling, not relief.
So you talked about including others. You talked a lot in your message too about love. You've been talking a lot about love lately.
Yeah, the Lord's had me actually rememorizing 1 Corinthians 13, the love chapter. And it's such an interesting chapter because it starts out saying, if you don't have love, you're nothing. And then it defines what love is. Love is patient, love is kind, love's not rude, love does not dishonor. And then it kind of takes this jump that, if I'm honest, as kind of a Bible teacher and whatever, for years I'm like, why did you get so disconnected? It takes this jump, and he says, and I won't get this worded exactly, but he basically says, when I was a child, I thought as a child, but now I'm an adult and I put away childish things. Like, what does that have to do with love? And then he comes back and says, these three remain: faith, hope, and love, but the greatest of these is love. It's like, okay, talked about love, talked about maturity, talked about love. Now I put this together as I'm memorizing it and going, maturity, growing up, is recognizing that we're faith, hope, and love, and we need all three, but recognizing where love happens and how love happens. Basically, how not for it all to be about me. Here's I think the key distinction between the world's definition of partying and even I think the wrong Christian definition of partying and God's definition of partying. And I don't know that I've ever put it this way before, so this is coming out of my head real fresh, so this may or may not be good. But we hear it from the world all the time. You deserve to be happy. And if it doesn't make you happy, don't do it. This goes back to what we've been talking about lately. God is not in the business of making us happy. Does he want us to be happy? Certainly he wants us to be happy. But God is in the business of helping us to become who we were meant to be. He's in the business of helping us become holy. Happiness is about what? It's about how I feel. Holiness, according to 1 Corinthians 13, is about how I help others become who they're designed to be. Mm. And that refills me. That's not unplugging. That's staying plugged into where I need to be. There's so much we could talk about with this.
Well, I wanted to ask you one more thing before we wrap up.
I'm scared now.
Yeah. Well, so we talked about these boundaries that you talked about, which is the best way to be free, right? Is to live within these boundaries. And so to party within these boundaries the way God intended for it. How do we then avoid being influenced by how our world sees partying, or maybe even how I saw partying, before I came to know Christ, if that was a big part of my life?
Well, I think part of it,
and especially to avoid the, God doesn't want me to have fun.
Yeah.
God's a killjoy. God doesn't like anything that's fun. How do we avoid that mentality when it comes to partying?
We said this, I think, a couple weeks ago. Who do you give room to? In other words, who do you give influence to? Certainly, you include all kinds of people in your celebration, but who's determining the direction of the partying? The Apostle Paul said, don't be yoked together with unbelievers. He didn't say don't hang out with them.
Right.
He's saying don't let them pull you. In other words, don't let them determine the direction. So I think part of that is, as you go into that, are they determining the definition of celebration for you, or are you determining the definition of celebration? If they say it's not a party until we all get dead cold drunk, they're determining the definition of that. For me, it's not a party until I can go, I'm ready to face anything tomorrow. Man, something happened. We laughed. We had a great time. I laughed till I cried, and I just feel encouraged. And man, I'm excited about tomorrow. And we just had stupid fun and did crazy things and had a good time.
Well, thank all of you again for being here with us for the second episode of the Growth Podcast. I hope you really enjoyed talking about partying.
One of the oddest topics I think I've ever talked about.
I'm pretty thrilled about it.
Yeah.
When's the last time you had a good party? Remember, tell the God stories, do things that are fun. God wants us to have fun, and include others, because love isn't about us. So that was great. I appreciate that, Pastor Mike. Yeah. Thank all of you again for joining us here on the Grow Podcast. Again, these are going to go out every Monday, so hope to see you again next week. Let's go and have a good week, and remember that growth always begins with a next step.